Hello, good Friday to everyone. Welcome to our live stream. I am still a little bit sick. It's been a tough couple of weeks here. So my training has been massively compromised. I only missed 1 or 2 training days, if I'm going to be honest. But all my conditioning work has been doing a lot of stairs and stuff, and then coughing up a lung halfway up. And has been incredibly ass kicking, let's just put it that way, in a bad way. But anyway, so I apologize if I'm starting to cough a little still while I do this, because I know that sounds pretty gross. We got training for the high school kids at 12:30 today. They have a half day today for school. So we have a early day of lifting, and as always on Friday, we push the prowler. It's a beautiful day here in London, Ohio. Very lucky to live here. Good people, good area of the world, good area of the country. So I hope everyone's doing awesome today. I hope everyone's going to have a good weekend. If possible, plan something stupid conditioning-wise, something hop on the Airdyne bike or something like that and try and do the Airdyne Marathon, which is 26.2 miles, or try the 12-mile Ranger test. You can wear a weight vest, a 20-pound weight vest, or you don't even have to put on a weight vest. Just see how long it takes you to walk 12 miles, something like that. It's good for the soul. It's good for your heart. It's good for your character. All that other good stuff. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started here. I don't think I have any big announcements to make. And my wife's not here, who usually tells me all this stuff, and I don't know. So anyway, all right, here we go. Caleb LeBlanc says, "Hey, I don't have a question, more like a selfish suggestion. You should totally do a metal podcast or a Q&A in the vein of what you're doing now as far as these live streams. I'd love to pick your brain on music. It would be fun to do. The turnout would be very minimal. And it's not like there's a million people watching these as it is. And so it's already a pretty select group of people. So, and the truth of the matter is I am a huge music fan. I have been. I still remember the first time I heard like real hard rock and got kind of addicted to it. And then I didn't, but my buddy got Morbid Tales from Celtic Frost and Welcome to Hell very early on when I was, I think, in 6th grade. I had a tape with a Slayer. The Haunting the Chapel was my first introduction to Slayer, Welcome to Hell, and obviously Metallica. And Celtic Frost was always the big band for me. So that's kind of where I was coming from at a very early age. Again, this wasn't because I wanted to be cool. It's just what this kid that I was good friends with listened to because his brother listened to it. And so I got a really cool education. Possessed, we had Possessed, 7 churches. And so I've always been drawn to stuff like that. So unfortunately, some of the new stuff, I just don't like the production. And it's hard to top some of the classics as far as I'm concerned. Like, I love black metal. And I guess technically I was into black metal before it was black metal, but I don't really care about that. But I still remember getting my first black metal album, which was the Hordani's Land, the Emperor Enslaved split. And then I got De Mysteriis Dom Satanas. I got a couple Burzum and stuff like that. And just being overwhelmed. That, and ironically, sludge was probably my first love. That style of music, not doom so much, but sludged out stuff like I Hate God, Iron Monkey, stuff like that. That's always been where my heart's been. So, but anyway, I'm not up on all the new stuff. I'm still kind of stuck in the past. That's all I really listen to. So probably not the most exciting thing of me just talking about the same 10 albums I listen to over and over again. But maybe I'll take some music questions as long as they're not like current stuff. So, all right. Josh Osborne says, hey, good morning. When using boring but big sets, is it possible to over-rep the weight if you have to step up in small increments, or is it better to just add another set? I'm not sure what that means, Josh. To over-rep the weight. So, Josh, if you could, can you clarify this about boring but big sets? The most important thing with the boring but big stuff is quality reps and that you use an appropriate weight. So it doesn't have to be super heavy. You don't have to be chasing the heaviest weight that you can do for 5 sets of 10. It should be quality reps, and you should be able to at least finish all your 5 sets of 10 sets in at least 20 minutes, usually with pairing it with another exercise. So if you're bench pressing, for example, you should be able to do your 5 sets of 10 with like lat pull downs or chin ups or something like that. If you're doing 5 sets of 10 with the squat and deadlift, we usually pair that with push-ups or dips or even chin ups too, obviously. That way you keep your body moving a little bit. So quality reps, guys, it's not always just about trying to add more weight. It's more about doing the reps correctly. So, and then Josh goes on to say, I hope you and the family have a great rest of 2023. Well, I am ready for that too. Our family's been incredibly busy, like everyone else is, especially with the holidays coming around. And but the one thing, whether you take this as a learning experience or some kind of mentorship, my wife and I do a tremendous job of saying no to a lot of things in order to keep the family less stressful and to keep our lives less stressful. So that doesn't mean we just hermits or anything like that, but we have a lot of volunteering responsibilities. And obviously as parents, there's a lot of stuff going on. So, but we try to always have the family first in mind and not someone else's family first in mind, and making sure that we are taking care of each other and that we're not completely and totally stressed out. So, all right, Albert asks, is boring but big suited for 60-year-old trainees? 60. I probably wouldn't really do it much, especially on the lower body. But again, 60-year-old trainee can mean a lot of different things. So it's hard for me to say yes or no, because a 60-year-old dude might be fairly fit. Some 60-year-old dudes might not be fit at all and might have a bunch of injuries and stuff like that. And then he goes on to ask how to include bear complexes in the 5-3-1. I remember someone talking about the bear complex, but I couldn't. It's just a complex, right? A barbell complex or something like the Javorcik. I'm sure Javorcik, I think that's how you pronounce it. That was all the rage probably in the early 90s. I'm sure some of you guys remember that. So there's nothing new under the sun, people. If I was doing any kind of the complexes, you would do the main lift, and then the complexes would be done as assistance lifts because you're doing them with weight. Super easy to do. Jameez 3112, Jameezy. Good morning, Jim. I love these live streams. Well, I love doing them too, so thank you for showing up. I appreciate it. I was wondering if you ever have the kids just do the base 5-3-1 and then follow up with increased insistence, or do you always have them doing a supplemental template? We mostly just do the base 5-3-1 with assistance. We don't do any supplemental work anymore. We've cut that out years ago. So there you go. Pretty easy answer. By the way, which is really fun. I saw someone posted a video as a politician, and I couldn't believe this. I actually showed my wife this video. But as a politician, I think he was from Canada. And the reporter asked the politician a question, and it was a yes or no question, and he just answered yes. And then another question later on, he just answered no, and then everyone just stood there. And it was remarkable because you're so used to politicians and other people answering questions, and they never really answer them. They just work around it instead of saying yes or no. And it was very funny because once he said yes and once he said no, there was like this uncomfortable silence. And he's like, well, that's all you need to know. Loved it. It's nice. It was refreshing. He's probably still a politician, but it was funny to hear. All right. Hey, Jim. This is from Chris Bolton. Hello, Chris. He recently had a hernia in his lower abdomen. Is there anything training-wise I can do to prevent this in the future? Would lighter bodybuilding type movements be okay for recovering? Thanks. I think I'm not an expert on this. Obviously, you need to be able to strengthen and stabilize your abs and your low back and your obliques and stuff, and just kind of making that strong. I think anyone who's going to lift incredibly heavy and push their body, I mean, there's going to be a chance for a hernia. Learning how to brace and strengthen that area is probably the two best things you can do. So I always say when regards to your abdominal and low back, your core, there's two things that we train. One is stability, which in my mind is kind of like rehab stuff, and you can probably do it. It's part of your warm up or before you go to bed. Basically, stuff like the McGill 3, and then you have other exercises for that area, which would be more strength oriented. That would be the ab wheel and hanging leg raises and back raises and stuff like that. I think a lot of times, and this was my curse, is once I got to a certain point, I just ignored the stability exercises because I thought the strength exercises were fine. The truth is, spending 5 minutes every day doing some health rehab stuff can probably go a long way. So my advice would be get the stability down, be smart with when you come back if you do have a surgery. And just listen, like there's just some things that are going to happen. And one of the things I tell the kids all the time is, football is 100% injury potential sport, meaning you're going to get hurt out there. It may be not horrible and may be pretty bad, but you need to kind of accept the fact that there's going to be some risk involved. So hernia is obviously not the worst thing, and they're obviously not the best thing. But just strengthen that area as much as possible and learn how to brace when you're training. Okay. Cillian O'Connor says, have you ever worked as a personal trainer? Yes, my first job out of college was personal training at a private facility. So that was a long time ago. My old strength coach, Dan Worth, owned this facility. It was not for athletes or anything. It was just for regular people. So I worked there. So very interesting job. You really have to be a good communicator. Obviously, you have to know what you're doing a little bit. Obviously. But it really taught you how to be a people person, even on days you didn't want to be a people person. And I think that stuff's important. I think communication, everyone talks about coaching and training and all this stuff and what books to read, but most of these people would do very well if they learn how to communicate, they learn how to speak in public, learn how to get your idea of what you want from the person in a short, simplistic, easy to understand message. Instead of just reading books all day, you should be out there learning how to communicate, because it doesn't matter what job you have, whether you're an engineer or strength coach or dentist, you have to learn how to communicate with the people you work with and your clientele. So, all right. Emil says, hey, Jim, I'm on week 2, day 3 of Boring But Big. Is there anything I need to remember to keep going? Quality reps, make sure you're eating and sleeping. That's the most important thing. I think a lot of people undereat or overestimate how much they're eating, or if they do eat enough calories, they eat kind of crappy food. So get your protein in. The big push at London High School is to try and get 150 grams of whole food protein a day, hopefully in the form of meat and eggs and stuff like that. So that would be my thing, and good luck, Emil. You'll be fine. Dude, I did that. Everyone on this who's probably reading this or watching this has done Born But Big, and it's been an awesome experience, even if it's a miserable experience, especially on squat and deadlift day. All right. Albert says, is auto-regulation for weight progression recommended, or just wait for 3 weeks to add weight load? Well, Albert, this is a complicated question, because the majority of people just need to train what's on the paper and learn how to do that. And then over time, by using their experience and their training logs, learn what to look for and then auto-regulate. But for a beginner who doesn't really know what's going on, auto-regulation is probably not a good thing, because they're going to make bad decisions. So follow the map until you learn how to get to a place without using the map. There you go. Look at that, Albert. Summed up in one sentence. So, but I think too many people auto-regulate without first learning on how to follow a program and learn how to get over hurdles with attitude and effort. So Eric says, if you didn't have the injury issues, how different do you think your training would be? I have no idea. Do you think you would still be doing barbell work, or would you be doing what you're doing currently? I have no idea. You can't separate all this stuff. I mean, that's I enjoy immensely what I'm doing right now. Eric, you have to understand, I've been lifting since I've been 13 years old. So I don't have like this burning desire I've got to accomplish all my physical goals, whether it be football or lifting. So I don't have this, burning need to do maybe some of the stuff that I did, 20, 30 years ago. So I got, as much as the injury sucks and stuff and having to deal with it, it was a blessing, because I became a way better coach. Just like when I started coaching the high school kids, I became infinitely better coach. I became way smarter as far as understanding programming. Man, have I changed, especially in the last 2 years. It's been unbelievable. Just understanding the development of a young athlete. So, as much as I sometimes lament the injury, I'm sure some of you have been there. At the same time, man, it opened up doors I never even knew existed. So I'm very, very blessed. John Donovan says, what's your best fat guy powerlifting story? I have no idea. It's just, I was definitely not a skinny powerlifter, but one of the kids asked me something if I had, big old chicken cutlets for boobs. So I was never that big, like that big. The one thing I'll never forget, I was doing some training one time, and I remember I was doing dumbbell inclines with the 150s, presses. And I remember picking them up, popping them up, and doing the reps and putting them back down. And I thought it was super easy. I'm like, man, I never could think of the day that picking up the 150-pound dumbbells and just knocking them out for reps on an incline press would ever feel like that. It was a really awesome feeling, to be honest. Now, obviously, I wasn't in the best shape, but it was crazy to feel that strong. And I still remember taking off 600 pounds. This was before I was really big. I was still probably 215, 220. I was squatting 600, something close to that, 585 when I was in Arizona. And I remember taking the weight off and feeling like it was absolutely nothing. And when I say absolutely nothing, I mean, it felt like I took out 225 and I just started doing reps. And I remember thinking, God, what a crazy what happens when everything starts coming together. So, all right. So anyway, but I guess that's I have to really think about that, the fat guy stuff. So it was, you have to understand that it had nothing really to do with getting fat. It had to do with, listen, I need to weigh X to squat X. That's all it came down to. And, however I got there, I didn't really care. I just wanted the result. I didn't care how I got there. So when you're really driven towards a goal, that's the most important thing for me, at least, was getting there, getting that, having a plan and getting there. So, and that involved getting bigger. So Eric Davis says, hey, I started walrus training a few weeks back. I thought I was starting light. However, I now developed some serious inside elbow pain from the pull-ups. All right, we addressed this last week. And then he goes on, should I just stop pull-ups for a few weeks? Yes. So I'd stop doing pull-ups. I would use mostly a parallel grip from now on. And in its place, I would probably recommend doing some kind of lower body movement or abdominal movement. So you're not don't worry about mimicking the movement of pull-ups. Just fill it in. So you would do, for example, push-ups, squats, and lunges. Or push-ups, squats, and some kind of abdominal work, push-ups, dips, and squats, something like that. You're just using a different movement. And then trying to let your elbows rest and feel better. So, but anyway, that's what I would recommend. Make sure that you don't jump back on the train as soon as possible. All right, give yourself 3 weeks or something, or however probably 1 or 2 weeks past the point where it feels good, and then introduce the parallel grip pull-ups. I think that's a game changer. Now, it may not be for you, but for me and many other people, that was. So Albert Wang says, what's the idea between 5x5-3-1? The idea was to get more volume on that top set without going to failure. Okay, we got a lot of questions here, so I'm going to try to do my best. How big and strong can you realistically get training walrus exclusively? No way to answer that, man. A lot of that has to do with your training background. So I don't know how you can even remotely understand or even calculate that. So again, you have to understand that if your goal is to be as big and as strong as possible, what most people would think is strong, then that's not the most. I wouldn't ever recommend that. I've said that a million times. You're not going to be Ronnie Coleman. You're not going to be a 800-pound deadlifter doing that. What you're going to be is a suburban commando. You're going to be incredibly fit. You'll feel much better, especially for someone who's a little bit older and has kind of put his body through the ringer. And you'll still have, especially if you do your reps well, you'll feel strong and in charge, so to speak, of your body. So, you have big ranges of motion instead of just chasing weights. And sometimes your technique and form might be a little compromised on some of that stuff. Your hips might feel better. This is just myself and others who have experienced some of these changes and stuff. But again, you're not going to turn into a big old bodybuilder. So I would not recommend that. Doesn't mean you can't use it as assistance work every so often, like we've talked about many times before. But no, I don't know how you can really answer that question. So let's see here. Thoughts on walrus style training with a barbell. I suppose similar to a barbell complex, but with rest periods between exercises. Too much stress if not doing squat, bench, deadlift, press as main lifts. All right, so I'm not exactly sure. We have done, and I've published many articles on this, as well as there's a huge thing on the forum that has some of this stuff, is using the barbell or a barbell movement in a circuit style training program. So yes, you can do that. I would not recommend that for most people because there is a certain amount of fatigue and there's a certain amount of loading that I wrote about that needs to be addressed. You have to understand the rep schemes has to be much lower than you think. Your rep quality has to be dialed in. You have to be willing to understand rest periods and how they feel on your body. So if something becomes compromised, you need to take your ego out of it. You can't be chasing clocks and times. You have to be chasing perfection. So yes, some of it can be done, but as an example, I would not be doing a squat, a bench press, and with a barbell and a deadlift with a barbell in a complex. I would not be doing that. That violates one of my basic programming principles that I've mentioned a million times. So there's ways of doing that, but I don't think it's relevant to most people because I don't think that physically their preparedness and readiness is ready for that. So there you go. But again, there was a massive thing on our private forum that discusses some of the options that you could use if you are at that point in your training. Samuel Jones says, I'm doing your 5-through-1 off-season mass right now. Should I go into 5-through-1 off-season strength before my prep? Should I go into... No, you should be able to go right into your prep. You don't need to do that. So you're fine. Lon Watson, Lon, I hope you're doing well. He retracted his message. So I'll just like to say hi to Lon. I hope things are going well. I hope you and your wife are doing well. Like I've said, I've known Lon for a million years. I've never met him, but he's been an incredibly supportive and great guy for probably 20 years now, maybe a little less than that. But anyway, I know Lon served in the Army for a long time. I think he was airborne. Could be wrong. Anyway, okay, Jonathan says, hey, thanks for doing these consistently, right? I've worked to the point where 20 rounds, okay, of 5 pull-ups, 10 push-ups, and 10 lunges per leg on every 3 minutes with a 10-kilogram vest is comfortable and can do it every day. With this being my new baseline, would you recommend adding volume, adding weight to the vest, or trying to increase pace for a challenge? So the answer to your question is yes. I think you should be able to do all those things. You can't just pick one and think and say that that's the way to go. So what I would generally do is I would keep your base workout probably, if you're doing that every day, probably 4 days a week. And 3 days a week, as long as you feel good. Okay, that's the most important thing. You manipulate one of the variables. So it might be the weight vest. And sometimes when you manipulate one of the variables, like the weight vest, maybe some of your numbers might have to come down. So instead of doing 5 pull-ups, let's say, what are you using, a 10 kilo, like a 20-pound vest, basically? Yeah, 22-pound vest. So let's say you put on a 45-pound vest. Well, you may not be able to maintain that pace with a 45-pound vest or maintain the number of pull-ups per set. So you would lower some of that stuff. So you can mix and match a couple of those things. The only thing that I would probably be wary is always trying to increase the pace, because I've noticed when people increase the pace, their technique and form kind of goes out the window. That doesn't mean you can't do it occasionally, okay? Jonathan, I hope you're listening. Just don't compromise the actual reps and the quality because you're trying to beat the time. So just understand that. But I think if I were you, I would probably try to add weight to the weight vest initially and just see how you do. You can try to maintain the 5, 10, and 10, but don't worry about the rest periods. All right, just worry about getting through the work first. So if you put on like a 30 or whatever, 30 or 35-pound vest, don't worry. Just turn off your clock and just get through the workout and see how your body feels the next day. So there you go. Let's see here. Here we go. God is a Beast is awesome. Thank you, Joe Hallman. I appreciate that. God is a Beast, besides being a very good song by Unearthly Trance, is also one of the training templates in the 5 through 1 Forever book. So, boy, you should have seen the stack of papers I had on my desk. My desk is an absolute mess right now, which is really embarrassing. And, but when I wrote 5 through 1 Forever, I had found all the stuff and notes I had taken over the last 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it was. And it was and I just write most of my stuff down on, I have a notebook, and then I just use printer, regular computer printer paper. And most of the stuff is all dirty and folded up. I just stuff things where they need to be sometimes. And so it was a pretty chaotic situation that year that I wrote that book. I was an absolute terror as a husband. So it's one of the bad things about how I write books. I'm not a very nice person sometimes. All right, Jesse Driscoll says, hey, Jim, I've been lifting for a decade. All right, he's 35 years old. At what age do you stop trying to get bigger and stop prioritizing longevity and start prioritizing longevity? I hate the thought of getting smaller. Well, Jesse, here's the good news is at some age, you're not going to have a choice. That doesn't mean you can't get stronger. It doesn't mean you can't keep pushing your body. But at a certain age, you should always be trying to put muscle on, but I don't think you should always be trying to get bigger. One of the kids asked me the other day how much I weighed, and they asked me a question. I said, man, I need to lose weight. And they're like, dude, why, man? It's awesome being big. And I said, yeah, that's fine. But, I don't want to, there's not a lot of guys who are 5'10" and are 7 years old and weigh, 225 pounds and are healthy. So at some point, and your body will tell you. I can't tell you what age, because sometimes people can continue kicking ass all the way up into their 50. Other people can't. And sometimes your heart's just not into it. So, but your body will eventually tell you, and your life will tell you, like the way that your life is and how you feel. There's going to be a time where it's hard to do. And it starts your body starts kind of betraying you in ways that it hadn't before. And that's just the way it goes. It'll hit you though. Trust me. But until then, Jesse, man, don't worry about things you can't control. Do not worry about things that are in the future. If you love what you do and you feel like you're doing a great job and it's where your heart is, and keep doing it. But it's nonsense to worry about any of that stuff. All right. It's going to come anyway, so don't worry about it. It's like worrying about death. Like, it's going to happen. So, all right, Lon says, when doing boring but big for 3 days a week, is it better to do the alternate exercise? For example, if I'm doing 5 through 1 for the bench, do the boring but big for overhead press. I think it probably will be fine to alternate. I don't think it's going to be any better. I don't really buy into that. The big thing, Lon, at your age, the one thing you have to understand is after you get done squatting, sometimes it's a pain in the ass to go and start the deadlift, for example. And I say at your age, I mean, you're probably a little older than I am, but not much. So having to warm up for another movement might be kind of a pain in the butt. That's the only thing that I would probably caution you on. So, but I don't think that's kind of overthinking stuff. I don't think it's going to make a big difference either way. But if you feel like you need to do it, or if it's much more fun for you for whatever reason, go ahead and knock it out. But you're not going to find me saying that this must be done, because a lot of stuff, they tell you what has to be done. We've been fed a lot of BS in our lives about training, that things have to be done this way or that way or this way. And then, you go out in the real world and realize that there's people who have been very successful doing it one way because that's the only way they could do it or whatever. So If it fits who you are and what you want at that time, just make sure your technique is solid, your reps are solid, and you're consistent, and you'll be okay. So, B Mook 19 says, hey, I really appreciate, oh boy, that just jumped ahead. These every week. Training what you can train and focusing on what you can do is very important. People focus too much on what they can't do. Yep, I will agree. And I totally understand that. You get wrapped up and worried because of an injury or something else that maybe you can't do X, Y, and Z. But the good news is you can still do A, B, and C. And so count your blessings. Like, I've said this before, but it's a privilege to be able to get sore. Being sore is awesome. And people who complain about being sore, I get it. I've been horribly sore. But if you're sore, that means you have the ability to train. And that's a awesome privilege to have. So, and I think a lot of people need to, I don't wish this on anyone, but sometimes when you have stuff acutely taken away from you, and not just, oh, my SI joint hurts. I mean, you have a near-death experience and your body's just riddled. You really start to appreciate all the things that you could do. And so I think that's important, and I agree with you. Hey, Jim, I started hard conditioning doing sprints. Okay, so he's sprinting as his conditioning or running. I was super sore, and I cannot squat right now due to injury from work. Should I do quad work on deadlift day so I have another day to recover? I'd have to kind of, that's a hard question to answer. So generally speaking, if you just introduce sprinting, and your body's just rejecting it, you can try to do some quad work, but I'd be very, very conservative on that. And you can pencil it in on your training program, but I'd be ready to take it out, especially if you're new to kind of running again and sprinting again, because that's incredibly stressful, especially if you're a little bit older. And when I say a little bit older, I mean, you could be in your late 20s, early 30s, and if you don't have that sprinting background and you haven't maintained it, it can really ruin you. So, however, if you do still want to sprint or run fast, because let's face it, most of us who sprint probably wouldn't classify as a sprint by the speed in which we are moving. If you can, use a lightly weighted prowler or go on some kind of hill. It doesn't have to be super steep, or stadium stairs, and sprint up there, because it's much safer on your body and much less chance of injury. So there you go. Hey, Jim, you've said before that the rows as a main lift doesn't work very well because of form breakdown. However, what about weighted chins? The form could be standardized. Thoughts? Yeah, you can do that, but you're going to have to add in your body weight and figure out the correct reps and stuff like that on that. So I've monkeyed with it. I've tried it a million times. And to be honest, this is if you want to give it a shot, go ahead. But I love having the main lifts, squat, bench, deadlift, press programmed. And to me, the best part of training for me is the main lifts. I love having things say, do this, wait, just point me in the direction, and I'll supply all the effort and attitude of doom and just bring it. I love that idea. Show me which hill to climb. I'll supply the effort and the attitude, and I'll take care of it. Now, with the assistance work, and this is obviously a big part of training, one of the things I like to do, that I love to do, is being incredibly creative and offering different challenges instead of things just being laid out perfectly. So to me, like, I miss that. I like doing crazy chin-up challenges or just trying to do X, Y, and Z. And taking that away from me would be very boring. So, but if you want to, go ahead and do it, but make sure you add in your body weight. Because when you add in your body weight, it allows you to make better jumps instead of just saying 25 pounds or 30 pounds. And make sure you have some kind of way of implementing this with 1 pound weights, like a X-Fest would be pretty good. So Thomas Riley says, what position did you play in high school and college? In high school, I was a tailback. We ran a I formation. I was the tailback. And at the Air Force Academy and at Arizona, I was the fullback and H-back. So that was football. So James Ward says, hey, Jim, do you have any cool Dr. Ken Lner stories? Yes. I never met Ken Lner in person, but Ken Lner would call up EFS, order some stuff, and I got to talking to him. And we developed a relationship over the phone. And so whenever Dr. Ken would call, I'd have to, 45 minutes to an hour, and I got to talk to him. And you talk about being lucky. I've said this before, but the best gift I've ever gotten training-wise was and I didn't ask for this, Dr. Ken sent me his book, and he wrote an inscription on there, signed it and wrote something, and it was probably the thing that probably means the most to me. And it's funny because I've never met Dr. Ken in person, but I still have, it's still like I'm getting kind of choked up, but Dr. Ken might be one of the greatest people I've ever met in this industry. And the best Dr. Ken story is, I'm not going to relate the specific stuff, but Dr. Ken was grew up in the powerlifting training world at a time when it was just being really developed. And he was also, knew a lot of the old timers, knew even in the bodybuilding world with the Weeders being in New York, stuff like that. So, but anyway, he used to tell these great stories of the history. And what's very funny is what a lot of people believe to be truth about X, Y, and Z, not exactly true. And it was very funny because when you get a little bit older, you realize a lot of times you get fed some BS, and a lot of times those stories don't make sense. But when you hear Dr. Ken tell them, like, oh, well, that makes sense now because I see why things happened, X, Y, and Z, whatever. The point being is, he was a wonderful historian, and I loved hearing those stories. And Dr. Ken had a tremendous amount of character. He was a character. Dr. Ken was a completely separate, amazing person that you don't really see anymore. And, grew up in a very difficult time where his life was very difficult. And it was funny hearing him tell those stories about his childhood and stuff. So I'm very lucky to have known him. So there you go. Eric Lewin says, any thoughts on surfaces for the sled or prowler pushes? Do you have any preference between turf and cement? I always generally push it on the street out in front of my house. Our football players push it around a turf field. My preference is you push that thing wherever it's easiest for you to set up and what you have access to. So no, I do not have a preference. I have a preference that you do it. So I'm not one of those people that thinks you have to do X, Y, and Z. The most important thing is that you do it in the first place. So no, I don't have a preference. Whatever gets you in there and gets you to do it consistently, I'd be good to go. Hey, Jim, I just got a sled. I live in the Bay Area. If I pull it down the street, my neighbors will probably hate me. What's your thoughts? I'll probably get the cops called on me. Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine people calling the cops on you for pulling a sled, but maybe there's shitty neighbors that you have. If that's truly the case, then I would find a park, or a parking lot that is relatively empty, and go to a place that there's no cars or traffic, and just do it there. But the one thing I always, and maybe it was because I've done this at a very young age, I never was self-conscious. When I was a kid, I would run my sprints out in front of my house. I would take a can of spray paint every year, remark my 40-yard marks with a little strip in the street. It wasn't the whole thing. It was just a little line. And I would run sprints right in front of my house. That's how I did all my 40s, basically. And I'm sure people looked at me, and I'm sure people who were driving by thought I was weird. But to me, the most important thing, I was getting in awesome shape. And I loved the fact that people were judging me. I loved the fact that, not that they were looking at me, but they thought it was weird, because I knew I was doing the right thing. And I knew I was doing stuff that was going to make me better. That's the most important thing. So I never got self-conscious about that stuff if you're doing the right things. So if God, I couldn't imagine neighbors calling the cops on you for a sled, but holy cow. And if you do it, don't do it, 6 a.m. or something when people are still sleeping, and don't do it late at night. So again, just, don't be a narcissist with that stuff. Understand that, some people, the noise would probably drive people a little nuts. So just be thoughtful and when you do it. Says, hey, Jim, I have a hangover like hell and I like it. Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad I don't drink anymore. Ugh. I've already asked this on the forum, but how do I make sure I don't cram too much into one training day? I'm boxing and strength training and run 1 mile once a week is broken. Okay, currently in doing some movement. Geez Louise. All right, this is a long question. So it basically goes on and asks, how do I make sure I don't cram too much into one training day? Well, you ready for this? This is going to be a mind-blowing answer. Follow the template as I wrote it, the weekly template. And if you're trying to do a million things, if you're trying to box, you're trying to run, you're trying to do movement training, doing some jumping rope, adding in exercises, if it's not specifically in the template, don't do it. All right. If I've given you someone say, listen, if you're starting to do, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is the only sport that requires specialized training. If you start doing that 5 days a week, you're going to have to pull something out. You can't continue running the same strength program that you did before you were doing it and then expect to do it. So as I've given people a million templates out there, and I've given people a lot of advice, like, listen, if you do X, Y, and Z, you can't do A, B, and C. It's not smart. The problem is he's got a funny nickname, so I don't know your name. The problem is you're not actually listening to what I'm telling you, and you're not actually doing the program as I've written out. That's how you do it. And remember, you don't need to do everything all the time. Just all you have to do, man, is since you're on the forum, go to the training logs page and see what I have our kids do. Magically, our kids, when they play sports, they do very well. And if you look at how little they do compared to how everyone else does stuff, you'll see how we break stuff up. It's very simple. have to run every single day. We don't have to do this every single day, because when we do stuff, we do it awesome. Our quality is awesome, and we consistently train. For a lot of these kids, it's 6 years. You know, they're in the pipeline for 6 years. So when you have a long-term approach and long-term mindset, you can realize that you don't have to do everything every day. So the answer is very simple. You're just going to have to put your ego aside and actually do it. So there you go. Albert Wang says, what are your thoughts on VO2 max? I never think about it, so I don't really have any thoughts. Should we all do high-intensity cardio? No, not everyone needs to do high-intensity cardio. All right? At the very least, guys, listen, I mean, I'm talking the very least. You got to have some kind of mobility, movement, stretching, flexibility work. Whatever that is, whatever makes you happy, do it. You have to have some kind of resistance training. All right. If that's body weight, if that's kettlebell, if that's the barbell, if that's the weight vest, you got to be able to do something like that. And you got to have some kind of conditioning work. For some people, that's running. For other people, it's riding a stationary bike. For some people, it just might be walking. So, man, there's like a fly flying around here. It's driving me nuts. Anyway, the point being is, you don't have to do anything, but you have to have some kind of those three components in your training. And not everyone can do high-intensity cardio, all right? Some people just frankly don't want to do it. And I'm not going to tell someone that your training program is worthless and stupid if you don't do this, because as long as they get the main stuff done, they're going to be fine. And if they're consistent and give great effort, they're going to be fine. So, you know, listen, there's a little bit of difference between the real world and what everyone's trying to force on you. Listen, if you train 3 days a week, all right, every day you lifted weights, you did one main exercise, and I'm fucking talking about every rep is solid, it is punched hard, every rep is dialed in, and you give great effort on every one of those sets. Doesn't mean you go to failure. I mean, every effort's dialed in. And in between those sets, you are knocking out the pull-ups and dips. So you're doing 2 exercises. If every day, 3 days a week, your training looks like that. And then on the off days, you put on a weight vest and walk 10 miles. Or you get on the Airdyne bike and ride for an hour. Or if you go push the prowler on one of the days and do, 45 minutes of the prowler. All right. So maybe it's not the most advanced or scientifically sound exercise program, but if you do that, you're going to be much better off than trying to hem and haw about all this other stuff. All right. Be consistent, give great effort. Don't run yourself into the ground all the time. So anyway, that's my message to you guys. So it'd be awesome if everyone could do high intensity cardio, but not everyone wants to do it. And I wouldn't worry about it if you don't want to do it. So as long as you're doing something, you're going to be good to go. Josh says, man, we got a lot of questions here. So I'm going to try to reel back in a little bit. Josh says, would it be easier to train high school athletes with the safety squat bar? Would it be easier? It would depend on the athlete. And in a big group, it would turn into a cluster. So it's best and economically sound to just use the barbell. So Jim Roby says, hey, Jim, I'm not sure if you're comfortable talking about this. If not, no worries. I know you talk about protecting your family. Do you conceal carry? Yes. If so, what is your setup? I've got a couple different 9mm. It's not crazy. I don't go bananas on a lot of that stuff. I just have a very basic setup, and I just get good at that setup, and I try to feel comfortable with that setup. So, but nothing crazy. I don't, just like with training, I keep my training very simple. With that stuff, I 5-through-1 everything else in my life. I try to do the basics very well. I don't need to do a million different things on my gun or anything like that, or when, my everyday carry is, a gun and a knife and a flashlight. That's about it. So it's not like I use the knife for stabbing people. It's just comes in handy a lot of times. But anyway, so that would be my advice, and it's probably not very good advice. So, all right. Alistair says, what does your diet look like these days? Just try to make good decisions, but I don't always make good decisions. So basically it comes down to, for the majority of like this week, I've pretty much eaten grilled chicken thigh and some kind of carb and I got a whole bunch of oranges the other day. Someone brought over a whole bunch of oranges. So I've been eating an orange or have an apple. And I eat probably 4 times a day. But if I don't want to eat on a certain time, then I just won't eat. I try not to force feed myself anything. And it's very small portions. I just feel better. But I don't eat a lot of food. Until occasionally, like I want to eat a pizza and then I'll eat an entire pizza. But for the most part, it's very small portions. And I always, when I get done with a meal, I always want to be able to do stuff. I don't want to feel like I'm just like, ugh. So I usually cut my portions generally in half of what most people would probably look like. So Bob Branksley said, is there any appreciable difference between 3 whole body workouts a week versus 3 upper and lower workouts a week? No. As long as you give great effort and your training is locked in, you're going to be fine. The good thing about doing full body workouts is if you do a good job and understand like a full body workout doesn't mean specific muscles, more is breaking the body up into upper, lower, and stuff like that. You can feel a little bit better, a lot of people, because they're using their body in a full range of movement throughout the week. And I think sometimes for a lot of people that makes a big difference. So, but in the long run, man, you're good to go. Okay. So whatever you want to do at that time, if something's really calling for you, you're going to be fine. I wouldn't get too wrapped up in that stuff. So Steven says, I train at 5 in the morning. Whew, that's early, man. My body would not be able to do that. And sometimes I only feel like doing the main lifts. Is this still good enough to maintain and gain strength? For the time being, if that's what you can do. But if I were you, again, I would pair your main barbell lift with some kind of movement. So as an example, on the days you squat and deadlift, do push-ups in between. On the days you press and bench, do chin-ups or pull-ups or rows in between. That way you get some, and especially at 5 in the morning, having all that different kinds of movement will warm your body up and you'll probably feel better. So that's what I would recommend, Stephen. That way you're basically the same thing. It doesn't require you to set anything up, so to speak. You can just kind of grab and go. That's one of the best things about body weight movements. When paired with a barbell movement, it doesn't require a whole separate, setup and station. Well, I mean, a station it does, but you know what I'm saying. All right. Caleb LeBlanc says, what is your favorite Slayer album? Also, did you hear Kerry King has a new band? I didn't know that. My favorite Slayer album. Well, I'll be totally unoriginal and say probably Rain and Blood. And the first album I ever got from Slayer is also the EP Haunt in the Chapel. I love that. But like most people, South of Heaven and Seasons is great. I think Divine Intervention is still really good. And obviously their earlier stuff is awesome too. Dude, Slayer is just Slayer. And still, I think one of the greats. I'm not very familiar with some of their newest stuff after Divine Intervention, if I'm going to be completely honest. But that song Gemini, the drum beat that Bostov does is unbelievable. I think his drums are like a riff in that song. Unbelievable. Josh says, hey, good morning, Jim. Well, good morning, Josh. At what age would you feel comfortable introducing 5 through 1? I have 3 children that are all active in sports and would one day like to introduce them to your program. I don't know if there's really an age, because kids will develop incredibly different from kid to kid in your family. So I guess, I am very conservative in how I train my son. I'm a big believer in just repeating weights and making sure everything is solid, and developing a general movement base with them through sports and other things. So if I had to put a number on it, I'd say maybe a freshman in high school. So, but that is probably saying, like, listen, you've done 5 years prior to that of consistent training and introducing movements and stuff like that. So they should already understand how to do a deadlift, how to do a pull-up, how to run, how to jump, how to do single leg movements, all that other stuff. And then a very direct and specific training program after that. Jason says, any thoughts on how people over 50 should set realistic fitness goals? Are there general lifting ratios and realistic goals for older lifters? Man, you can't really do that, again, because a 50-year-old might be a guy who's been lifting for 20 years, or maybe he's been lifting for 2 years. So, it also depends on, if your best bench press is, if you're already bench press 500, you're not going to be setting PRs when you're 60. You're not going to, if you bench press 500 when you're 25. So, but generally speaking, I think each person, based on how their body is, their body type is, how their injuries are, I would generally say, if possible, have one lower body intensive goal. So squat squat or deadlift or trap bar or something like that. Have one upper body push goal and have one upper body pull goal. So, and then that person would set those standards for themselves based on their readiness, preparedness, and background and injuries and stuff like that. So, but I don't know if I would really put in a realistic goal, because people are built differently. People have a tremendous amount of different backgrounds and injuries. It's hard to do. So, all right, we're going to get through here, guys. RNC says, what are the benefits of running a 3-day template versus 4-day? Will you make more gains on a 4-day template? What are the benefits of running a 3-day template versus a 4-day template? Well, the benefits would be, if you can't recover correctly from a 4-day template, the 3-day template will probably be better. And it's impossible to say that you're going to make more gains on a 4-day template if you're not recovering correctly from a 3-day template. So that's really hard to answer. But you have to understand that when you train, the stressors in your recovery level will vary greatly. And it's not just training stressors, it's life stressors that come into play. So when people say, hey, when I was X years old, I could train 4 days a week. I still feel like I'm in pretty good shape, but for whatever reason, after I had 2 kids and a full-time job, I can't. What's wrong with this program? Well, the program's not. The program is the problem. The problem is you can't recover from that. So your training has to be lined up with your recovery. And that, anyone who's read any of my stuff, the first rule of recovery, number 1, is don't train like an asshole. So you have to train that's appropriate for your recovery abilities. So, okay, a couple more here. Jim, thank you for your giving us another great live stream. Well, I appreciate that. I am looking forward to seeing your channel continue to grow. Well, hopefully it does. Please make it where we can send a donation in. Thank you again for being a great human. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know about that. I don't know how to do any of that stuff, guys. I'm just super pumped up that I learned how to do this stuff. So, all right. Albert says, hey, I really appreciate taking your time out of our answering our questions. Despite your cough, I'm fine. I'm fine. I am fine. So it is 11:05. Does anyone have any final questions real quick here? Here's something. I assume your shoulder issues have continued. What are you doing for flat bench? I don't flat bench. So a Cadillac bar. That's a fancy name. But if I was going to press again, I would probably use a football bar or something like that. So yeah, if I was going to bench press again. So, but I, for whatever reason, I can do heavy weighted push-ups to a certain extent. I can't do a lot of reps in one set, but I can do, for example, you know, a whole bunch of sets of 5 or 8 with a heavy vest, and just my shoulder just doesn't work very well anymore. So that's fine though. I'm just thankful I can do push-ups. But for whatever reasons, push-ups don't even hurt my shoulder. It just, my shoulder gives out at a certain point, just kind of goes numb, and just kind of, I'm sure everyone here who's older knows exactly what I'm talking about. So, all right. So we are going to wrap this up. It is 11:06 in the morning here in Ohio. I hope everyone has a great weekend. I appreciate everyone who showed up. I appreciate everyone who asked a question, because this is what keeps this going. And I appreciate everyone's support. And I hope you're good to your family this weekend. Be good to yourself. Be nice to your wife and kids. Be brutal to your own training. And set some stupid conditioning goals for the holiday season. And that way you can at least justify some of the crappy food you're about to eat. So anyway, have a great weekend, guys. Going to a wrestling meet tomorrow, watching some of our kids wrestle. And then Sunday, I'm doing absolutely nothing but training and laying in bed and hanging out with my family. Anyway, thank you guys. Love you guys. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.